Hello, everyone, and welcome. If you've been following along weekly, you've probably noticed that CASEL CARES has explored a wide range of topics, from youth voice to evidence-based strategies to support parents and teachers to better manage anxiety, to superintendent leadership, equity, diversity, inclusion, and more. And that has been intentional. And it's intentional because SEL, systemic SEL, is a multifaceted approach that involves a lot of things. It involves structuring district policies, like including bringing together stakeholders to establish a vision for promoting educational excellence and equity, to quality professional development. It includes school-wide practices like climate culture initiatives and school family community partnerships. And it includes classroom-based teacher practices and evidence-based programs to foster social, emotional, and academic development of adults and students and positive learning environments that they create together. Our goal here through CASEL CARES is to be responsive to the needs of our nation's educators, to help broaden the SEL community, and to share diverse perspectives, expertise, and guidance with a wide range of people who are interested in learning more about the latest advances in SEL research, practice, and policy, and who are committed to high-quality teaching and learning opportunities. Every week, we've been seeing new groups of people and new people present and attend these webinars. Educators, parents, students, policymakers, school leaders, teachers, social workers, psychologists, counselors, and every week has affirmed that while there are sometimes debates and different approaches about many things, we can all agree on the importance of relationships and enhancing social and emotional competence for young people and adults. It gives me really great hope to see the broad support for SEL that so many people working together and communicating about the best ways to educate students to become knowledgeable, responsible scholars on their way to pursuing post-secondary education, being engaged citizens, and having fulfilling careers. Today's panel and discussion serves as an example of how people with diverse perspectives can come together to share on how to promote the social and emotional learning of children, adolescents, and even adults. Each type of school, private, charter, and public, has insights to share over the next hour about how social and emotional strategies can help students feel more connected and engaged with remote and distance learning. We hope that you find great value and better understanding in listening to these varying perspectives, and that the content will serve to generate ideas and further exploration. Please join me in welcoming Michael Petrelli, who is today's moderator and who will introduce our panelists. Michael is president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, and I'd like to welcome Michael to the screen.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. It is great to be with you and great to be with everyone out there as well. And we are just so honored to be co-hosting this webinar today with CASEL. You've all been great partners, and your team just does a fantastic job with this program. Like Karen said, I'm Mike Petrelli. I'm the president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. I'm also the father of 2 boys, 10 and 12, plus a dog and a cat, so any one of which may make an appearance today. So we'll see. That could be exciting. For those of you who are new to the Fordham Institute, we are a national education policy think tank with headquarters based in Washington, D.C., where we publish research and commentary on issues in K-12 education. We also do work on the ground in the great state of Ohio, where we've got 2 offices, one that works on education issues statewide, and another that actually serves as a charter school authorizer. We've got about a dozen high poverty charter schools that we oversee in Dayton, Cincinnati, Columbus, and in Appalachian, Ohio. So we are here today to talk about what 3 outstanding leaders are doing to address the social and emotional challenges that their students and educators are facing as a result of this pandemic. We really thought it was important to invite leaders from all 3 sectors in American education, like Karen said, traditional public schools, public charter schools, and private schools. Now, all of these leaders do lead systems that have very high rates of poverty and a population that's mostly comprised of students of color. We are all grappling with the same challenges right now when it comes to supporting our community's social and emotional needs. And especially when we can't be with each other in person, and when so many educators and children and family are dealing with traumatic health and economic situations ourselves. You know, 2 of our 3 panelists are working in New York City, and you can imagine the challenges there are that much harder when they have lost so many lives to this terrible pandemic. We're hoping to discuss today what's working and what isn't, to identify what kinds of challenges and solutions transcend these different types of schools, and also provide each of you tuning in with concrete recommendations that you can apply to your own schools or districts. We see the number of participants just keeps ticking up and up and up. We are way over 1,000 already. It is such a great to see that this topic is such a high priority for so many of you. So with that, let us welcome our panelists. We're going to start with Eva Moskowitz. Eva is CEO of Success Academy Charter Schools in New York City. Welcome, Eva.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Next up, we have Kathleen Porter McGee, Superintendent of the Partnership Schools, which is a private Catholic school network in New York City. Kathleen, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. And last but not least, Juan Cabrera, the Superintendent of the El Paso Independent School District in Texas. Juan, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
All right. Yeah, it's great to have you. Well, we are going to dive right in today with questions that we've developed ahead of time, in large part with help from the audience. You've all been sending in questions over the last week, and we have tried to include as many of them as we can. So we're going to really just get started with the basics. I'd love for each of you to take just a few minutes and explain how the educators in your schools are currently providing social and emotional supports in order to maintain your students' feeling of connectedness, at least as best as you can while we are all doing this learning remotely. And of course, interested if there are certain factors that have enabled you to be successful, and what your educators are doing to foster that sense of community and help students and staff through this incredibly stressful time. So that's a lot to cover, but let's take a crack at it. Eva, why don't you go first?
Sure. Just by way of context, we're educating 18,000 students K-12. And our social and emotional learning would be hindered if we didn't make that a priority when we were in a bricks and mortar world. And so if that isn't front and center, it would just be hard when hit by a pandemic and being in the epicenter of the pandemic to do that. But our school model, our school design is based on really strong relationships with children and devoting time and attention to social and emotional growth. Obviously, doing it through the rectangular box is not the same as being able to give a kid a hug or walk a kid around the hallway. But schools are involved, in my opinion, in sort of mood enhancement and to some extent self-regulation. And so remotely, we are doing that through the box. And last week, we had 64,000 meetings. That's just 1 week. And that as we're not only doing classes, but our teachers and our principals are doing one-on-ones in addition to our school psychologists, because either children are not showing up or we hear from another kid that someone's really struggling with anxiety or they tell their advisor. And so there's a lot of work and attention going into how do we keep kids positive? How do we keep kids motivated? How do we keep kids having a sense of control, even though the world around them is obviously spiraling from a health perspective and an economic perspective?
Fantastic. Wow, so much to dig into there. We'll get back to some of those points. Kathleen, how about you?
Great. So our network, so I run a network of urban Catholic schools, partnership schools. We have 7 schools in Harlem in the South Bronx, so smaller than Eva's for sure. We have about 2,100 students, but also in the epicenter. And as Eva said, really facing, as we all know, some real challenges, including infections in their family that are really scary, and loss of loved ones and community members. And so when we think about how are we addressing social emotional needs of our students, I kind of feel like there's like 2 different ways we could talk about it. One is, how are we addressing the very real crises that some of our students are facing during the pandemic? But then there's also a broader question of how do we address SEL over the long term more broadly? And then how are we continuing that through this pandemic? And I think in both, there's some commonalities between both of them for sure. I think they both come down to kind of starting with who we are as communities, and focusing on kind of connection, community, and also support. And so I think for us, what was at the heart, starting on the day of the school shutdown, and that week leading up to the shutdown was uncertain and scary and felt like things were escalating really quickly. So we were already feeling the anxiety increasing in the adults and kids alike. So what we did immediately was focus on that connection piece, making sure that we could, via telephone or email and through virtual devices, reach every single one of our students and every single one of our families. And we did that within the first week, and that has been something that has sustained everything else we've done since then. The community piece, I think, is the second and most important one. Whenever we think about social emotional learning, and I think one of the things that we've learned over time is that you can't like duct tape social emotional learning on top of something. It has to kind of come from the ground level and inform everything that you do. And so when we look at it, we look at ourselves as communities first. And so in the pandemic, the first thing we tried to do was bring the community together, even though we couldn't bring the community together, but reaching out and putting folks in touch with each other, making sure that our teachers were connecting with the students, and then making sure we at the network were as well. And then I think the last piece was just support. So one of the things that we were able to do was, in addition to, I know so many people have provided devices to everybody that needs them, we also were able to establish a COVID family relief fund to provide direct support to the students and their families who were most directly hit. And so I think that by focusing on that sort of connection, community, and support first, that allowed us to build a sense of like, we can do this, build a sense of resilience that I think the students are mirroring back to us now in ways that are really inspiring.
Great, wonderful. Juan, how about in El Paso?
Well, for us, we have a large system on the U.S.-Mexico border at the very edge of Texas, and it would feel more like New Mexico than Texas. We're so far from everything. And we have about 55,000 students here on the border. So for us, initially, just more of a logistical issue before we could even get into the appropriate SEL work. Our real focus became first on the week of March 12th was how are we going to make sure that we could find all of our students? And it's almost as if, now we were lucky. We started SEL in a big way 5 years ago. And so we were one of the first ones out in the country in terms of doing a real big push. I did that specifically because given all of the years of excessive testing and the focus on testing and data, I just wanted our district to focus more on relationships. So we started a big movement 5 years ago to do adult and student SEL. So we already had that underpinning. So intentionally, when we started the work on March 12th, when we made the decision, we decided that within our academic team, we were going to have a group of people that did nothing but look for families. And I mean, in any way that we could. And we started tracking that because with 55,000 kids, it's you're going to have quite a bit. And after the first couple of weeks, we still had about 17,000 students that had not responded to us, which really concerned us. I'm proud to say, as of this morning, I got an update, and we're at about 114 kids that we have not made some sort of contact with. So for us, it was that logistical challenge. I immediately called the United Way. I called my largest mental health organizations locally and started to integrate with some nonprofits so that we could have folks actually go visit people and go to their homes. For us, before we could even get to do the SEL, it's just finding people and checking on them. And our calls, we created a survey, and a lot of it, we did have some parents that at first were a little offended or taken back because we were asking a lot of non-education questions. But I made the point, I said, let's deal with that. I understand. And we had some pushback on leadership, but I want to know just how they're doing. Let's start with the basics. Have they faced any trauma? Has their situation changed dramatically? Do they need any kind of help at all? And we actually opened it up. We said, we're not just calling about education. Is there anything you need? We have a wide network of nonprofits we've already engaged. We're starting to work with them. And then once we go through that process of identifying the kids, it's also then, as we want to do SEL and deal with kids here in virtual learning, we want to make sure that then we take all that we've learned and the work that we've done in the classrooms and building relationships, and we've made it clear to our teachers, spend as much time on engagement and checking on kids and set aside time during the day for that in our schedules, not just academics. Just check on people, talk to people, build relationships with them, try to create engaging activities since we moved to a pass-fail and we didn't have the grades anymore. And now what we're doing in the summer is the same. We're actually going to create some enrichment summer school. We've never done this before. Typically, like most large urbans, we have just the remediation and the kids that maybe need to take a test again or haven't passed. But now we're going to expand our summer school widely, as broadly as we can, so that we have kids more engaged. And again, we're able to continue checking on their social emotional health and supporting them through building strong relationships.
Great. Well, let's do this just so that all of us can understand what this looks like in your schools. Let's get just some basics out there in terms of how remote learning is working. So Juan, we'll start with you. And I imagine it might be different for elementary schools versus middle schools and high schools. But what are your teachers, what are the expectations in terms of how much teaching they're doing a day versus kids doing things independently? Are the kids watching videos of their teachers, or is some of it real-time interaction over Zoom or something like that? What does that look like? And then we can unpack a little more about how you're getting at the.
Okay, well, I took a different approach than a lot of folks. That we're part of the Council of Great City Schools and CASEL and a couple of other large networks. So I have the opportunity to visit with a lot of school system leaders across the country. And I felt that most folks I was talking to across the country were looking more for a Band-Aid approach at virtual learning. I do have a technology background. I'm a technology attorney, so I'm more inclined to do that as well. And at the time of the pandemic struck, we already had 32,000 MacBooks out in the hands of our 6th and 12th graders. We started that process 4 years ago. And then all our elementary kids had iPads at school and whatnot. So for us, we decided to stand up a school as if we were never going back into a building. And the reason I approached it that way, a lot of our folks initially said, well, why are we going so far? Why are we putting so much effort into this? It just seems like, we just need to get through. And I said, well, here's the situation. This is going to be tough for all of us and really tough on the teachers. If we set really high expectations of the quality, continuity, sustainability of this virtual school, then no matter how long it's for, we're going to do a good job. And who knows? At the time, we didn't know. And that was why folks wanted to do less. We thought we might go back in April. We really didn't know. So we approached it and we created a schedule, a lot of messaging. We did 1 whole week of full training for teachers and then brought the students in. We have 2 hours in the morning, 9 to 11. We're giving the kids a 2-hour break at lunch, and then we go 1 to 3 in the afternoon. And we're trying our best to mimic a schedule to create some normalcy for kids. And we've had a handful of complaints that it's too much, but honestly, out of 55,000 kids, it just has been a handful. People are praising us and talking about how real the school feels, how much it looks like we're engaging the kids, and we're taking it very serious, and we feel like it's helping the kids take it very serious. So for us, it looks and feels like a virtual school, and again, I think part of the reason we've been successful is because we built it with the intent that we may not go back to brick and mortar.
Yeah, that's great. And that means that you have plenty of time also to do a variety of things, the academic learning, but also, some of the community building.
Yes.
And the other. Right.
I also want to mention any clubs that we've had in place, again, this is for our SEL approach, they've remained online clubs. So we've had all those. We've also had a lot of our physical education teachers offer to teach Zoom classes to kids. So we're trying as much as we can to be creative and innovative and engaging to help all of us with our mental health, the adults as well. I think we're all struggling.
How about for you, Eva? What does it look like at Success Schools there in terms of how much time kids are online with their teachers versus independent? Tell us a little bit.
Similar, we were interested in making sure that this was not a situation where we were essentially sending links to parents and sort of worksheets, and it's easy to keep kids busy. I think it's much harder to do actual virtual schools. So we transformed our regular units, mathematics, science, project-based learning, history, for a virtual context. We may be the only school system in America, although I don't know, and maybe my colleagues will challenge me, but we're still giving assessments. And really focused on, how to ensure that kids are ready for the next grade, while of course recognizing that this is a radically new context. And as my colleague Kathleen said, we have parents and guardians who have passed away. We have kids who are now in the foster care system who weren't before this. And so we don't want to be obviously insensitive to the context, but we also think that kids still should be reading Romeo and Juliet, and that's important, and they still have to do their mathematics. Today, our kids, high school kids, took their digital AP art history exam. And, things are continuing despite the difficulty. And both to Juan's point and Kathleen's point, it's not only the social and emotional health of the students, but it's hard for teachers who have young children of their own, and they're on the Zoom box, and they don't have all of the normal supports. But we are doing virtual teacher planning meetings. Principals are observing teachers through the webinar and the online learning, but it's for us, it's the same. We do progressive pedagogy, so we do a launch, we do a discourse, students do independent work. We are able to collaborate. When I first saw this, I was a little, maybe you could accuse me of being a Luddite, but you can digitally do breakout groups. And so when you're doing project-based learning, if one group is studying the robin and the other group is studying the swallow, the teacher can push a button and the kids are in the groups that they're supposed to be in. It does require a level of planning and logistical kind of support, because you have to, through Google Classroom, you have to get the robin group their bird study materials and the swallow group and not mix them up, etc. But you can do an awful lot of great learning. Our teachers were worried for our youngest children that they would not be able to navigate the technology. And I have always said that it seems like the shorter you are, the more agile you are with technology. And it's really sort of the tall people who have trouble with it. But all of our kindergartners are on, our version of Zoom, which is Blue Jeans. We do small group guided reading groups. We do phonics, all of the things that we do in a bricks and mortar school, we are doing. And we also think that it relates to social and emotional learning. And I don't know if my colleagues have this challenge, but one of the counterweights to what I would consider social and emotional health is that teachers can micromanage kids and not really give them the autonomy that they need in order to have the level of intrinsic motivation and self-regulation that they need. Our teachers have been forced to let go. Like, the kids got to log on. And yes, of course, we call them to say, sweetie, are you having any problems? You got to get, log on. But it's forced a level of self-management that, frankly, I struggle to get in a bricks and mortar world. Teachers are very hesitant to let the kids pour their own juice for fear that it will be a mess. But you need kids to fail at some of the tasks of life and be resilient and get back on the saddle. So we're having some interesting discussions about autonomy and intrinsic motivation that have been actually harder to have in a bricks and mortar context.
That's great. I think all of us as parents are seeing this too, that for many of us, our kids have a lot more free time than they usually do and are finding new interests. All these stories about kids taking up cooking and the like, and we've seen some of that ourselves. I will say on the logging in, my third grader needed a lot of tech support those first few days just to get on to Zoom, and not so much anymore. I will also say that I'm sitting here feeling very jealous, and maybe some of the folks watching are as well. So far, we've heard from two leaders. I think we hear this from Kathleen too, that you're basically providing close to a full day of instruction still, if not a full day. Here where I am, Montgomery County Public Schools, Maryland, teachers are doing a great job, but it's much less. It's 45 minutes of live instruction for elementary school kids and basically no live instruction for middle school and high school kids. So, which I think is much more the norm nationally. What you are doing is phenomenal. Kathleen, what about for you? What is it looking like in terms of just the schedule so that you can carve out time for these student supports?
Yeah, it varies by grade level, as you would expect. So our students, we have students in grades pre-K through 8. We don't have high school, but obviously the amount of time each child is expected to spend doing work varies. So our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders obviously spend more time than our pre-KK and first graders. And we definitely took a hybrid approach. So we are a curriculum-driven network, as I know Success Academies is as well. So we have a common curriculum, a common scope and sequence, and some common pacing guides, regardless of whether we're in remote learning or in classroom instruction. And that's actually been a real blessing at this moment, because what it's allowed us to do at the network level is prioritize content. So right now what we're saying is, okay, and we started this, school closed on March 13th. Students left school on March 13th with work to take them through the first week. And during that first week, we then prioritized we figured out what distance learning was going to look like from that point on. And we were able to prioritize what is the core content that we need to focus on each day. How are we going to assess that? How are we going to make sure the kids are progressing and give them meaningful feedback, knowing that you can't give them feedback at the same rate that you could when you have them in the classroom. And I just want to echo and amen, Eva, your point about autonomy. We were just talking about this yesterday and saying that one of the things we appreciate, because as leaders, when we're coaching teachers, we often say, you want to put more of the heavy lifting on the kids. Well, now you have to. And there are some interesting things that we're learning. Again, I don't want this moment to last any longer, but I think that what we're learning is that kids can do a whole heck of a lot more than maybe we give them credit for, because we're so worried about them failing. And I think there are some interesting lessons there. But in terms of what we're doing, it's a little bit of a hybrid approach. I am, in usual circumstances, a bit of an unapologetic Luddite. And so we love our kids engaging with real books and writing, using paper and pencil. Now we have embraced technology because we don't have the kids anymore, so we need the technology to get to them. But we've also sent them home with books that they're reading. We are still expecting them to do some writing, and while also having some synchronous instruction online. So we've really tried to take a hybrid approach. And I think the last thing I would say is that we've also not tried to solve all of the problems at the network level. So we've tried to prioritize at the network level the supports that our school leaders and that our teachers need. But then we've also, again, going back to each community is different, and each teacher has a different level of facility with technology or with different platforms. So we've allowed some sort of hybrid approaches at the school site. And one of my favorite stories is one of our veteran teachers, Eva Hernandez, who's been working in Catholic schools and in our schools for 47 years, teaching for 47 years. She's absolutely outstanding. And when we moved to distance learning, as you might expect, the thought of going on to Zoom or Google Classrooms, I think was a little challenging for her. And so what our school leader was able to do was find a way to adapt so that she could still connect with her students. And so now the school leader herself runs the technology side, so that all Zoraida needs to do is the planning and the student feedback. And I think having that level of adaptability at the school site to help teachers kind of make the most and make the content in the moment their own, I think has helped the kids, because obviously the kids' strongest connection in the school is to their teacher. And so allowing those differences, I think, has been really meaningful.
All right, well, let's try to get real concrete here if we can. You've all said a lot of good things. Some of the things I've heard so far in terms of what you've been doing on providing supports to kids. First of all, that it, of course, was incredibly important that before all of this, you had already built strong relationships with the children, with their families, you know, as essential. Then, first of all, as Juan said, you had to go out and find the kids and find the families and just make contact and make sure that there was a way that they were able to participate. Then offering help. I think I've heard that from all of you, you know, with the very real needs related to the pandemic, related to unemployment and the rest, which is huge. And then I'm also hearing that you've all gone back to a pretty strict schedule. Again, something that I think is a fairly unique, or at least is not necessarily the national norm. We don't have great data on exactly how things are going out there, but you know, you've got more of a typical school day than maybe a lot of schools do. And I suspect that's helping a lot of kids with, you know, feeling some sense of normalcy then beyond. So, but tell me some more. Are there some other specific things that you are doing, you know, where you're really trying to make sure that your teachers every day do certain things when they're with the whole class, or to build community, or to ask kids how they're doing emotionally? Are you asking them to do more journaling? I mean, what is it that you might be trying right now to kind of help kids just cope with this crazy situation?
So I think
Anybody want
just,
to take that?
oh, sorry.
Why don't we go Eva and then Kathleen? Yeah.
Well, we do advisory every morning, every single day, and our advisory ratio is about 12-1, and that's what we do when we're in school, and that's really an opportunity for teachers to check in emotionally with kids and to set them up for a successful day. With the little ones, we still do our morning meeting. We still do our community meeting. With the really little ones, we break them in two because we have rather large class sizes and we were afraid of the tenuous connection. So we do community meeting with half the class. It was sort of interesting. The kids actually objected. They wanted their other, 15 friends. And so now we do a smaller meeting in the morning, and then we do a bigger meeting in the afternoon. We were trying to make it more personal. The kids were not having it totally. So we adapted. And we also have the kind of culture where kids are reaching out individually to their advisor, to their principal. And so we're very aware of the struggles that our kids are facing. It has required, and I think Kathleen mentioned this, we always have been serving poor kids, but the volume of challenges is at a kind of decibel level that we're not used to. So kids not having food, or sometimes it's like their glasses break and they have they don't have the money, or the pharmacy isn't open, or this, that, the other thing, making us, even more of a social service agency than we would ordinarily be. Can you imagine a kid who, loses their tooth or has a sort of dental problem? It's not so easy to get that fixed in the current environment. And when you have 18,000 of them, not as big as my colleague Juan, but it's a lot of calls and emails and texts. Hey, Ms. Moskowitz, I need a this, that, and the other thing. And having the infrastructure at the same time that, we faced budget cuts here in New York. So we've already lost $1,000 per student. And we think there's a lot more coming in that direction. So how do you provide those services in this, economic meltdown? It's really challenging.
So hard. Kathleen, you were going to get in there?
Well, I did want to clarify. So when I say we're doing a hybrid approach to instruction, it's not, there is a combination of synchronous and asynchronous learning so it's not necessarily the case that everybody gets online at 9 o'clock in the morning and goes until a certain time in the afternoon. And I think that distinction matters because one of the challenges that we faced early on, I'm sure everybody has faced, is that obviously people have, even when you can get the devices in their hands, depending on how many children you have, depending on whether the parents are essential workers and the children are spending the day somewhere else, you need to have some instruction that can happen or some work that can happen outside of kind of normal school hours. And so that's where our hybrid approach has started to come in. So we've used different approaches where students can dip in to get teacher support at idiosyncratic times. And I think that that's been really helpful. And also the teachers have created a combination of classroom meetings, but then also videos or looms that kind of mimic some of the classroom routines, but that students can access at different times.
And are there some specific things you all are doing when you think about, okay, let's do a little extra on community building, on checking in with kids, anything around that?
Yeah, so for us, a big part, obviously being Catholic schools, a big part of when we think about, sort of social emotional learning really broadly, we think about prayer, reflection, and faith as much as we think about academics. Both are equally important and two sides of the same coin. And so for us, one thing that we've really tried to do is make sure the prayer life and the faith life is still continuing remotely. And in many cases, I think this is really important for the church as well, because obviously masses also can't happen. And so sometimes the connection to faith and to prayer is happening more now through the school than anywhere else. And so we've done whole network masses. We still have morning prayers with our morning meetings. We still, that is still, I think, a really, really important piece of our distance learning because it's such an important part of our community as well. And I think especially with all of the hardships that families are going through, drawing strength through faith is something that is really important. And so that's been really a critical part of our work as well. And it's a bunch of different ways. Again, so the morning meeting, similar to I think what Eva has said, which is you can access it live, but you can also get to it later if you need to, if you're not able to access it live. And I think building those connections between teachers and students as well. So we'll have discussions which can happen via Zoom, but they can also happen online where students are answering questions on, whether it's a Google Doc, something as simple as that, and then teachers are providing comments to them in real time. So there are a number of different ways that our teachers are trying to get creative with maintaining those connections. But I think the biggest additional thing that we're doing is the prayer, the reflection and faith, and making sure that everybody has time for that as well.
Well, Juan, I know you're not doing prayer in the El Paso Public Schools, but what else? What are you doing to go a little extra mile on building community or on checking in with kids right now throughout the day?
I think the biggest part, and Eva mentioned this as well, is maintaining that advisory period, and giving teachers permission, because we're very concerned about, we call it not summer slide anymore. This is very serious academic regression. And I've got a lot of planning going on with groups that are already working on that and digging deep on what we're doing to get kids caught up. This could have, lifelong impact on a child for missing so much school at a critical time of year. So academics matter, they're very important. But we've been very clear through advisory and through giving teachers tips that the relationship with them and the checking on them regarding their trauma or how they're feeling and talking about the situation is every bit as important and maybe more important than academics in this time. So, it's that freedom that they're having to say, it's not playtime, it's serious, academic time, but integrated in all of that work, in addition to the specific advisory period, is that time to talk with kids and check on them and let them talk to each other, have sort of a structured discussion time. And we've heard, I've gotten a lot of feedback that that's making really, really big difference. And I think that, this is why it's so critical for the leader of an organization to be very serious and focused on SEL. And I think it's important, of course, finances allowing it, to have a separate division as I do to lead it, because then kind of putting your money where your mouth is. People know you're serious about it. And if, like Kathleen mentioned, it permeates all that you do. It's not a section, it's not a time. It's like, oh, it's SEL time now. Oh, let's go back to school. Everything we do is SEL. And I think as a leader of the organization now for 7 years, giving not only the permission, but asking people to be intentional about SEL, and then setting aside the time like we are now. In addition, I mean, think about it. When I made a statement to everyone multiple times in the second week of March that we are a half social services agency and half academic institution now, and then we needed to focus on social services. And I put no limits on that. Whatever it takes to find out how families are doing and what we can do to support them is what we need to do. And I think that really makes a difference because it's intentional, it's specific, and they have the permission.
I think maybe if I can just add one more thing. One, you just made me think of one thing that one of our principals did, which I thought was really meaningful, which is related to kind of the idea of student voice and student agency. So when we think about the idea of building resilience through a crisis such as this, one of the things we're trying to do is ask them, right? Like students, especially
Yes.
our students, have agency, and empowering them to understand that and to make them know that how they're feeling and thinking and adapting to this crisis themselves is a really important part of it. So one of our principals at St. Athanasius in the South Bronx, she did, as part of one of her morning meetings, a stoplight analysis where she asked all of her students, red, yellow, or green, how are you feeling? And they all had to submit written responses. And it was amazing what the students said. They were incredibly introspective, and they were like, when we started, I was red, but now I feel like I'm moving to yellow. And I think that, again, when we think about that long-term SEL and how are we building the sort of self-management and the resilience and help, or really not building it, how are we unlocking it, right? Because I think it's already there. And I think that some of our principals have found some really kind of low-key ways to do that and to really make students see how powerful they are.
This one probably for you, Juan, because I know you serve so many more high school students than Eva and Kathleen do right now, but it has always struck me that the secret sauce of the American education system, the thing we do so well, comes around our extracurriculars, and
Yes.
that when other countries try to figure out, how do you know these people who are so creative and know how to work in teams, it's athletics and it's music and it's the choir and it's theater and all the rest. And a lot of kids get their identity from that, and they get a lot of that, again, those social and emotional supports from all of that. That all stopped also. How have you thought about that? Or is there anything that can be done to keep some of that moving at this time?
Honestly, Mike, I can't think of one. We've tried to maintain every extracurricular. Obviously, you can't, with some of the contact sports, whatnot, but anything to do with music or art, these sorts of, all of our programs have continued. We've had some wonderful concerts that have been put together by different band members. Every high school has done that. In terms of the extracurriculars that are sports related, the best that we've been able to do there is just, again, all of our coaches. My daughter's on a volleyball team. She works out with her volleyball team about 3 days a week. And I really like that. I mean, it's on her schedule. She's excited about it. The entire team is on Zoom, and I've sat in, coaches talking to them for a little bit. They actually do a very structured routine together, and everybody's in sync. And then he'll talk to them again at the end of kind of encourage them and give them some food tips and workout tips. I'm very, very happy with that. And we're doing that across all of our sports. But again, the extent of that is just the physical exercise piece of it. But every other extracurricular, from clubs to music to arts to dance, they're still meeting on a regular basis. We maintained all of that. Part of it is also for us as a public institution and folks that still have jobs. For me, it was twofold. I think I have a responsibility to the taxpayers that, we're all still getting paid. I want everyone working. And I was able to, as I again divided this into a social services agency, we created a lot of other jobs and responsibilities that may not have existed. We actually turned some of our staff into technical support for EPISD at home. So we put up a call center where they would help parents. We were really creative about what are the new jobs that are created within our system where we can shift. First of all, teachers were off limits. I said, teachers, don't bother them. They only are going to deal with kids, and same with administrators. But all of the other people that we have in the system, let's think of what they can do to support. And that I think has made a big difference.
That's great. Hey, Eva, what have you been doing in terms of supporting teachers, especially when it comes to their social and emotional needs? I mean, again, I just feel so bad for you all in New York City. I'm sure you've had some of your staff who have dealt with loved ones dying or being seriously ill. They're watching this play out in their beloved city. How do you think about helping them stay, with their emotional well-being throughout this?
Yeah, so I mean, that is a really big concern because an educator's job is really hard, and it's hard to imagine, how much you miss the kids. It's like, I think people forget that you go into this because you like the social interaction with children and students. And so, being on your rectangular box with them is not the same as being in your classroom or, to Juan's point, going to the basketball game and seeing your kids in a totally different context. That's part of building the community of the school. And so we don't have that anymore, but we do a number of things. We have a whole series of everything from mindfulness to exercise online for our faculty so that they can still be fit and do yoga. It's actually easier. We provide it in a bricks and mortar context, but it's challenging across 50 sites. Doing it online is actually a little easier. Again, I wouldn't wish this as our regular world, but that is the truth of the matter. And adult self-care is really, really important to us. And so a series of workshops from, sleep and getting enough sleep to nutrition, making sure that our adults know that we want to invest in their well-being as well. We've been helped by the fact that our communities are so strong in the bricks and mortar world that, I personally do several times a week with all, 47 of my principals. I will gather all of the APs together and we will do AP training. We did that before Corona. Now we're doing it again through the boxes, but the strength of those relationships. And I would say one thing we haven't talked about is the parent community. And we spend an enormous amount of time supporting our parents. And it's everything from the struggles of parenting. This is a totally different environment than what our parents are used to. This is sort of a 24/7. They're on call in a way that we were able to take a little bit of that burden off of them. And we have a really long school day. So our parents were used to support for many, many hours. So the support we need to give our families and our parents ranges from how do you do home schooling? What does that look like? To, when there are technical issues, parents have a lot of anxiety. What if the tech doesn't work? And to explain to our families what they do if they have a tech breakdown. We have a ticketing system, and so it's really nothing to stress about. We will get you a device so that your kid can continue, but also explaining our theory of remote learning. If you can imagine, and I know, Juan, you said that you went to pass-fail. San Francisco decided to give out all A's. Seattle followed suit. And I came out and I said, we're going to give grades. And that could have been a really controversial position and people could be all mad. The way you navigate that is really to explain to everyone, not that our way is better, but why we're doing it in our particular way. What is the SA philosophy? What are the changes in the standards because we did modify them, but we didn't go so far as, you know, some of the more radical approaches. You can't do that in this context if you don't have strong relationships with your families. I mean, I did webinars where 500, 600 parents at a time are getting on the webinar, and I'm explaining why we pivoted to the grading policy that we did. And by the way, it's an open town hall. So they're asking me questions. Well, I don't think this is fair. And what if this, and what is that? And I really had to take the time. That's a good question. Let me take that back and reflect on that. And maybe we do need to make a modification. But having that relationship, it goes to Kathleen's point that it's about community. School is not a fence around children. It's a community, and either you have a really strong, transparent, trusting community, or you've broken trust, in which case things don't go very well. And that's what we've tried to navigate.
Well, that is very well said, Eva. And I am afraid we're going to have to leave it there because we are running short on time. But I really want to repeat that point again, right? Is that it is about the community, and that all of you were able to build on the relationships that you already had before this terrible pandemic struck. You know, we haven't gotten to it today. I'm sure in future webinars, the CASEL folks will get to it. Is, you know, how do you start to build relationships in the future if we're, you know, in the fall in an environment where we've got new students as kindergartners are coming in, or new students to middle school or high school, and we may have to go back to remote learning for part of that time, and we haven't had a chance to build those relationships. So this just makes all of this that much harder. At least we were able to build on something this year. We might have to do it. It might have an even bigger mountain to climb next year. Well, again, hey, I really want to thank our fantastic panelists, Eva, Kathleen, Juan. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you even more for what you're doing every day with kids. It really sounds amazing, the support you're providing to your students and families and educators, and appreciate it. It's incredibly inspiring.